I'm going to skip forward and just get through here. We started our studio about 7 or 8 years ago on a couple of projects that were decidedly not about building cities. They were about building architecture and crafting architecture, and have subsequently graduated to where we want to be, which is rethinking cities, working with cities, transforming Toronto, transforming Innisfil, and hopefully others around the world. This is our WTF proposal in Shanghai. This is the book that we wrote with Hans Eblings called Rise and Sprawl. It was a critique of the condominiumization of most Canadian cities and the quality of the architecture we were building, and the future that we were laying out through building that architecture and how we could do it better. That are true mixed use. You're not talking about like a lobby and a couple of stores at the bottom. We're talking about 50-50 purpose-built apartment and also office and cultural uses for the other 50% of the height. Most mixed use infill buildings and towers in Toronto are 99% luxury condos or high-end condos. I shouldn't say all of them, but most of them in downtown Toronto. The programming is limited, except for in limited cases such as TIFF. Enter Union Station, where we were hired to really rethink the quality of the interior infrastructure at Union and turn Union into a platform for Toronto's most advanced, ambitious culinary, cultural, and retail offerings. And so it was really an opportunity for us to take a piece of infrastructure and bring the public realm to it. And this really catapulted Partisans into the project that I want to show you today, which is all about people and density and the idea of the future of cities, which is orbit. So about 2 years ago, we won an RFP to create a vision for a town outside of Toronto that was essentially part of the future of the transit system north between Toronto and a city called Barrie. And if you don't know much, I know that everybody on the Zoom is from around the world, so I'm going to give you a bit of an intro. Innisfil is in this area north of the city called Toronto on this huge island called Canada, which is really, in my humble opinion, one of the last humanist places in the world to live. Canada is an ambitious project, but sometimes we feel quite alone. And Innisfil is 50 kilometers north of our largest city, Toronto, which you see right here on Lake Ontario. Innisfil has a population of about 37,000 people in an area of roughly 260 square kilometers. It's predominantly houses along the water, Barrie to the north with about 500,000 people, and that or going towards that, and then basically farmland. Okay, and there's a train track. Right now, it looks like this. And with respect to the future, we want to prevent it from looking like this. And essentially, this is the way Canada has been developing cities. Joanna spoke to this earlier. It's all about sprawl. And if you look at the area that I'm talking about just north of Toronto and compare it to local areas, you got 630 square kilometers for Toronto at 3 million. Again, the density is so much different in the downtown core, but really the density of the city, very low Toronto. It's spread out. And if you look at Mississauga, which is the city essentially attached to Toronto on the west end, the population is about 1 million people in the same square kilometers as Innisfil. And if we're not careful, Innisfil will literally become the same kind of thing that Mississauga has in the last 50 to 75 years. And that's because there's nowhere for Toronto to expand to anymore. And you're seeing housing prices explode to a point that it's unaffordable and inaccessible. Now, why Innisfil? Innisfil was chosen as a future location for developer-driven transit. And like a spark plug, they decided to put this transit station between Toronto and Barrie as a growth node. Essentially, it's like a beacon for growth. But the question is, how could you build a complete community? How do you build all these things in? How is it more than just a suburban development? Well, you have to think about how to create a center of gravity. What's in orbit? We called it an orbit because the station becomes this core. that mobility and people moving without cars and having access to transit and access to retail and access to institutions is key. And so in a way, it's about creating a center of gravity for a region that doesn't really have one necessarily. It's very diffuse. There's several hamlets and they all kind of orbit around each other. And the station is positioned in such a way that all of these neighborhoods can have a place that is like a commercial center. We have to control the density, of course, and we do this through looking at precedents in city design. And so we look back to the Roman grid. We've been doing that for 2,000 years. Enter World War II post-war planning, the spaghetti plan, which is very popular amongst developers, whereas we've chosen to take the approach of the Ebenezer Howard Garden City utopic plan and really see it forward. The one innovation we had in it is we've married this sort of a concentric city with the square edges because everything around it is obviously contained within a square. And thus you have the Squircle plan. You started a circle and you ended a square. So we called it the Squircle plan. All of these precedents from around the world informed us, from Moshav cities in Israel, Ebenezer Howard, Burning Man. We looked at the scales of neighborhoods in cities around the world with similar climates. It's very important to note that the future of our cities also depends on climate. We can't just build cities without thinking about how the world is changing physically. And we can't deny that it is. And so we've been working very carefully with some very interesting engineers on how to design cities so that there's an outdoor comfort in places that are -10 for a part of the year. And this is about looking at cities like Malmo. It's about looking at cities like Chicago and others around the world for their cues. Scale is important, the human scale. And then the question to us was, how do we design this city? How do we create a vibrant core? How do we create responsible density? And how do we reconnect it and contain it? Because the question was, could we contain 100 years of growth in 3 square kilometers? So instead of maxing out 300 square kilometers, how do we contain 100,000 people or more within a much smaller area, be an amazing city, but also be spectacular? And it's possible, it's doable. With gentle density and pedestrian-centered roads and a linear park along the track in the middle, we can do it. And luckily enough, we went through this process and our vision for how to build the orbit was accepted on multiple levels of jurisdiction, from municipal votes, 2 of them being two of them being unanimous and another 2 basically almost unanimous, and then a provincial level vote. And now we're into really the stage of getting the architecture to a point where it's actually buildable. So it's really kind of a dream come true of what's possible in a kind of context of rural reimagined and city building, as well as transit infrastructure. And I think that this really speaks to the potential for, in a post-COVID world, to rethink how transit can be a catalyst for relieving pressure and prices in very dense city centers, while also providing joy, beauty, accessibility, and really a mode of life that we can bring people from around the world to live in and appreciate Canada, our way of living, and be a place that we can all be proud of. So that's really my take on the future of downtowns. And I really appreciate your attention today, and I look forward to your comments and hearing back from everybody in the audience. Thanks so much.